everyone, and welcome back for episode number 50 of the Mixology Talk podcast. A couple years ago, Chris took a class to get his level 1 sommelier certification, and yes, he passed. After the class, he was telling me that there was quite a bit of crossover between the skills that a sommelier needs and those of a great bartender and cocktail creator. So this week's podcast is an homage to the wine world, talking about the things that bartenders should know about wine and cocktails and how they compare. As always, you can find the show notes at mixologytalk.com/50. Let's get into it.
So as a bartender, it's important to know a little bit something about cocktails, wine, and beer. You kind of have to be the jack of all trades when it comes to alcohol, because you're probably going to get asked questions on all of them.
Yeah, and there's actually quite a bit of overlap in the knowledge you need about wine and about cocktails. And actually this week, that's what we're going to be focusing on. So there's kind of two components. There's the palate, which is all the different things that go into the taste and the flavor and how things feel. And there's using the palate to make a good decision on what to order in terms of food. So first, let's talk about the palate. When you're asked about a drink, 99% of the time, you're going to be asked about the taste because, frankly, that's what customers think of when they're thinking of what to order. And while wine and cocktails are made very differently, there's actually quite a bit of similarity in the way you'll describe the flavor balance and palate.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things as far as wine and cocktails go is the acidity. So while all cocktails in a bar should be pretty balanced, different folks like their levels of acid very differently.
Yeah, definitely. In wine, you have a full spectrum of acidity, frankly. You can get the more tart style of white wine in Germany, for example, all the way to the very low acid California Chardonnay. Now, in case you were wondering, I am a California Chardonnay girl. That's definitely, and you won't find Chris drinking that at all.
No, definitely not.
And with wine, the level of acidity depends on all sorts of things, like where the grapes are grown, the type of grapes used, and how the wine is made.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of science that goes into viticulture, or the growing of grapes, and collectively this word is known as terroir, so weather patterns, when is it hot, when is it cold, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's really fascinating, and as you get more into wine, there's a lot more geekery that can be had with just the growing of the grape itself. It's
absolutely. Yeah, but it's even beyond the growing, right? It's beyond the terroir because it depends on when the grapes are picked. It depends on what kind of grapes they are.
Right, so that's when the winemaker really has a hand on developing the style of the wine itself. And as a bartender, you have kind of the same hand at it. You can adjust acidity to match different expectations from a guest. And knowing how to do that is a very important part of our job.
Yeah, so in some ways the bartender is actually acting as the winemaker with a cocktail because he actually has the ability to adjust on the fly.
So yeah, there's some extra tools in our belt that we can adjust that kind of a cocktail per order. Yeah,
so when you're helping a guest make a decision about their drink choice, definitely get a sense for their taste for acidity. So like I mentioned, Chris likes a drink that is just downright sour to me. It's undrinkable because it's so sour, but I'm really sensitive to sourness. I tend to like things more on the fruity and sweeter side of the spectrum. So like I mentioned, Chris is far more likely to order a Sauvignon Blanc. I'm far more likely to order a California Chardonnay. Likewise, we like our margaritas very, very differently.
Right.
And as a bartender, if somebody wants a glass of wine, you're going to have to suggest something different. But if they, for example, were to order a margarita and you get their sense for acidity, you can adjust on the fly. Wine, on the other hand, can't really be adjusted to meet a guest's taste. I wouldn't really recommend grabbing a Sauvignon Blanc and throwing in a teaspoon of sugar. It might look a bit weird.
A little strange.
Yeah, might not taste right either. Probably not a good plan. So what you're going to need to look for is a wine that already has a natural sweeter profile. And you've got some options here. I think that if you're looking for something sweeter, you can look for a sweeter style of wine, like a Riesling or a sweet style of Riesling from Germany. Late harvest wines, ice wines, these are all going to have a sweeter, fruitier profile.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're very delicious, by the way.
It's true. It's true. So next up is body. Body is a term that describes the viscosity or how a drink feels in your mouth. I've also heard it referred to as mouthfeel, which kind of makes sense.
Right.
It's kind of like the weight of a drink on your tongue.
Yeah, and a cocktail made with egg whites may have more of a silky, kind of a thick body, whereas really like crisp Riesling will have much more of that style of body, so much lighter and crisper on the palate.
So in cocktails, the body comes about through what's in the drink. It's relatively straightforward, really. If you're using things like cream, egg whites, or thicker sugar syrups, you're going to have a heavier drink. It's pretty simple. You can even use things like gum syrup, right?
Right, yeah, and that will definitely affect the viscosity of the drink. The gum syrup will definitely have more of a weight to the cocktail.
Exactly. And on the other hand, with wine, you can't really add cream or egg whites. Oh gosh, that's so gross.
Yeah.
Your body's going to need to come from somewhere else. And typically what you see here is that the viscosity of a glass of wine is actually dependent on the alcohol content. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, is that wine under 12.5% alcohol is considered light-bodied. Between 12.5 and 13.5 is considered medium-bodied, and over 13.5 is considered a full-bodied wine.
Yeah, I could definitely see some of the correlation there, because thinking about some of the 15.9% California Zinfandels we
yeah.
they're just big.
They're heavy.
Big. Same thing with some of the cabs coming out as well in that spectrum.
Now, would you say the same thing for spirits? I'm just curious, thinking of a lighter or a lighter alcohol content spirit versus heavier. Do you notice the same thing in terms of the viscosity and weight of it?
Not necessarily. Typically, I mean, if you go to one extreme on, like, for Everclear, for example, it doesn't have the same kind of weight.
Right.
So I think a lot of the body that comes with spirits comes from barrel contact. So a lot of the brown spirits will definitely have more of a weight to them because they have a little bit of that sugar coming out of the barrel and some of that heaviness from the barrel as well.
And that makes sense because during the distillation process, so very much of what was in the distillate has been removed in terms of the flavor, in terms of the body. Whereas with wine, you get that alcohol content from fermentation.
Right.
And all of that other good stuff is still in there.
Right. Absolutely.
That's a technical term. Good stuff. So we've covered 3 of the pieces of palate, 3 of the different components that are going to go into the flavor and mouthfeel of a glass of wine or a cocktail. And now's where the rubber hits the road. If you work in a restaurant bar, you're probably going to get questions about not necessarily what I feel like drinking, but what goes well with what I've ordered.
Yeah, and this is where you could spend a lot of your time doing research and trying things out. And it's a lot of fun, but it can get really expensive very quickly.
Yeah, there's nothing like research in the spirits and wine world, right?
Right, exactly. But if you work in a restaurant bar, you should definitely expect to get questions about what goes with this dish or what goes with that dish.
Exactly.
And the wine term is definitely pairing. Right.
And they use pairing with cocktails. Sometimes you'll see cocktail pairing menus and things like that.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely less common. So if you have a good understanding of what we talked about earlier, acidity, sweetness, and body, you're actually in pretty good shape. Because from here on out, the rules are all the same for cocktails or wine.
Right. So,
and before I forget, I'm just going to interject here. We actually did an episode about pairing, episode number 14. So if you've been listening for a while, you might remember that. And if not, you might want to check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll briefly kind of go over this topic again, just to bring everyone up to speed. But when you think about pairing food and pairing wine, as Julia mentioned, a lot of that translates to cocktails as well. So, for example, if you order much lighter foods like salads, fish, some light pastas with maybe, a real light sauce, you want to kind of try to match the acidity levels or go a little bit higher in a cocktail.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because you're looking for a lighter bodied drink to go with your lighter weight food. You don't want a super, super heavy drink while you're enjoying perhaps a salad with a tart vinaigrette.
Right, exactly. And the important thing to remember here is that if you have a really kind of acidic salad dressing and you have kind of a weak, non-acidic cocktail, vinaigrette is just going to bowl over that cocktail and it's going to make it taste really flat. So that's why it's important to match the acidity level or even go a little bit above or below that specific point in acidity.
Yeah, you just kind of want to be in a similar place. If you think about it, if you have a glass of orange juice after brushing your teeth, you're making your mouth go crazy, go so far in different directions. And similarly with pairing, you kind of want your palate to be in the same place with the food and the drink.
Right. And the same thing that goes with fish, too. Oftentimes you'll see people squeezing lemon over their fish. So the cocktail can definitely take the place of that and bring in some more flavor and some more interesting concepts with that as well.
Absolutely.
So you can see where we're going with this, matching the level of sweetness, the acidity, and having a lighter bodied cocktail definitely goes a long way with these kind of first course lighter foods. And I will say that carbonation in general is always a good thing. If you think about salad, fish, and even lighter pastas, champagne is usually a really natural choice.
Absolutely.
So adding carbonation to your cocktail is an easy easy thing to
Or
do.
even make a cocktail with sparkling wine.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
It makes a lot of sense, yeah. So on the other side of the spectrum, you have heavier foods. These are things like steak, red meat, heavier pasta dishes. I'm thinking of like pasta carbonara, things with
Right.
lots of cheese. I'm getting hungry.
I know, seriously.
no.
It makes me hungry and thirsty now.
I know. And with these guys, you're going to really need a drink that's up for the task. You're not going to want a super light, bright,
Sauvignon Blanc style.
like a glass of champagne or something with your big fat steak. You need something that is going to be able to hold up to the weight of the dish.
Yeah.
So one great example might be that a Manhattan is fantastic with steak. And I'm not sure if Chris recommended this because he loves Manhattan and steak,
Damn right.
but I do think that they could actually go pretty well together.
Yeah, so one of the things that you'll commonly see as a pairing strategy with wine is the higher the fat content, you want a lot more of the tannin content to kind of counterbalance them because they kind of work together. So with the steak scenario, so imagine having a ribeye that has really great fat content, it's nicely marbled, and you're going to want to pair that with something with really big aggressive tannins like a Zinfandel because they kind of calm each other down.
And when you say tannins, I would almost say that the cocktail equivalent is bitterness. Would you agree?
Absolutely. So bitter.
It's not quite the same thing, but I would say that they sort of serve the same purpose. So if you're going to be serving a cocktail with a big, bold steak, you're probably going to want something with a little bit more of those bitters to hold up to that fat content.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe you have that Manhattan and you increase the bitter content,
right?
An extra couple shakes of bitters, and it should pair up really nicely with that steak. Same thing with heavier pasta dishes. You want to have kind of a similar body and a weight to it. So with pasta dishes, if there's egg actually in the pasta dish, like carbonara, as you mentioned, or even a nice heavy cream sauce, I think egg whites would make a great way to kind of weigh the cocktail down. Egg whites plus maybe a gum syrup to really affect the body and make it kind of match in texture to what you're actually consuming.
And likewise, you can get away with a little bit more fruit or a higher sweetness with heavier foods as well. I mean, it's not going to run the risk of completely overwhelming the dish because you've got a little bit more weight in what you're eating as well. So you can get away with something with a little bit of a sweeter profile. You can get away with a wine that's got a heavier body, more sweetness, more fruit. That's definitely something that's a good option as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So while cocktails and wine are made in very different ways, I was really surprised at just how much they have in common when you're just trying to choose what to drink. Hopefully this episode will help you choose your next cocktail or glass of wine wisely, or of course, to do the same for your customer. Thanks again for joining us. If you have any questions or ideas for future episodes, head on over to mixologytalk.com/50. There's a button somewhere near the end of the page where you can send us your questions, or you can just let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. See you in a couple weeks. Cheers! Never miss an episode by subscribing in iTunes or YouTube. And as always, check out the show notes by clicking on the right.